question that I have for all of you. We'll just do a little round robin here, starting with Mel. What opportunities do Common Core state standards bring for improving English language learners and special education instruction?
Well, based on my experience in when National Geographic called America's most diverse high school, we had 70% of our students were born outside the United States. 88 countries represented 66 different languages at any time. We had 400 to 500 students in language classes. And that school went from a failing school to one of the highest performing in our state. The Common Core, had I had the Common Core at that time, it would have really enabled us to really accelerate what we're doing, primarily because we were able to look at a school-wide literacy initiative and really make literacy a part of our culture. And to really move those students forward, literacy has to be a part of level 1 intervention in every class, every day, reading, writing, higher order thinking, which we did, and listening and speaking every day in every classroom. And so we learned that we could not rely on level 2 or level 3 intervention. So what I'm saying is we did whole school RTI. Literacy was embedded in every class, everything that we did. We didn't have universal design at that time, but those two things, we essentially did that without naming it universal design, and with the emphasis on literacy and the literacy-rich environment. I see the Common Core as being what I call the gold major of literacy, or promoting that.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So, I guess the piece that I'd like to talk about, from, at least at a state perspective, is the fact that they are common. We talked about yesterday, 45 states, 3 territories have adopted the Common Core standards. And that, I think, although it's changed things for all students across the country, I think diverse populations, often, especially in a small state, we have limited resources that we try and stretch out to support all students. But with common standards, we have the resources of most of the country. When I think about 5 years ago when I would go to conferences, national conferences, I should say, I didn't go to conferences and hear conversations or hear presentations about my state standards and how they can support the needs of diverse learners. Now we go to national conferences and we hear about the Common Core standards, and they talk about how to address the needs of diverse learners, of students with disabilities, of English language learners. And that is amazing, to be able to have that collective support to support these populations. And I think just the vast organizations that are doing things. For example, Rhode Island is a part of another consortium, because we have common standards, to develop an alternate assessment for students with significant cognitive disabilities. And that consortium is also developing assessment, but it's also developing curriculum resources and supports, which, as one state is very hard for us to do, but collaborating with many states, we can provide those resources to our teachers. If you look at our English language development standards for our students in New Jersey for the WIDA assessment, they've made those connections to the Common Core standards in their newest version of what they're calling amplified standards. But to connecting those to the Common Core and giving examples of what the Common Core looks like at various levels of language development. So, the Understanding Language Project, which again has done a tremendous amount of research and written papers around meeting the needs of English language learners with the Common Core, but as well as the next generation science standards. So I think the idea that, all of these states are sharing standards has really been able to allow us to capitalize on collective resources. And I hope, as the discussion went yesterday, that as individual states, we're trying to share across states, but that we'll even get better at being able to do that over time.
Yeah, I think it's really important to note that the standards are written for all students. It's very clear. This is not for some students. All students must receive the opportunity to learn and meet the high standards in order to get access to the skills and knowledge needed for college and career readiness. These are standards built on focus and coherence. And the focus is really going to allow teachers the time to work with special needs students and to develop the proper progression of learning. It gives them the time to really know, not just the time, but the focus of the standards allows the teacher to see what students actually need to know, what they need to be able to do in order to not just make it to the next grade level, but really to be on the path for college and career readiness. And the coherence of the standards gives teachers the understanding of how the standards build upon each other and support each other, which will allow the instruction to just be more clear instead of just looking at a student and saying, you know, they're a couple grades behind, or they just don't know this, let's just teach a 5th grade student at a 3rd grade level. You can really look at the progression and see where you need to reach a student. So the focus on coherence is really the main opportunity, especially in mathematics, that the standards bring.
Thanks, Martin.
Thanks. And can you hear me? So I didn't turn off my mic, or did I turn off my mic? It's not great. Okay. All right. I think the first thing that I want to point out is when you look at how the PARCC states are arranged, PARCC has 4 of the big 6 states with the most ELL population: New York, Florida, Illinois, New Jersey. But it also has the states with the greatest increase. So if you look in the Southeast U.S., Appalachia, through the Midwest, these states have seen huge double and triple digit increases in their ELL population. Right now, 1 in 9 students are ELLs. By 2025, they predict 1 in 4 students will be ELLs. So we're really seeing a change in the American population. That being said, ELL teachers and the major ELL researchers, they're very much committed that we don't need a simpler ELL curriculum. There's been a lot of focus in the last few decades about looking at comprehensible input, and there's a new movement that's been going through ELL research field where you're trying to focus on the output of what students are doing. They need access to rich text. So the person really behind that is Rod Ellis. He's been doing a lot of interesting work. And the American researchers have been looking at that, and they've been really saying, you know, what we need is we need to have ELL teachers have a commitment to be teaching the language that students will be needing to access the Common Core curriculum. And just to go into a little more detail, there's about the Understanding Language Project. There's a new project that's being put out by Stanford. It's sponsored by the Carnegie Foundation. And with that, what they're doing is they create a whole set of research papers. There'll be resources. Just keep going back to that website because their specific focus is to put out resources that are ELL specific and ELL responsive, but also even beyond that, responsive to the diverse language needs of all students. So you might kind of have a different dialect of English and need to learn a common register of English. So there are a lot of resources being put out there, but that's a major one that's being developed right now.
Thanks, Lynn. And Mike, with my apologies, if I could just add something to what Lynn shared there. The Understanding Language Project and PARCC actually have a really nice relationship going. A number of their lead thinkers and lead doers are also on PARCC committees, like our technical working group on English language learners. And similarly, a number of PARCC representatives are on site when they have their meetings and are reviewing their materials as they're produced. So the lead thinkers in the U.S., right, again going back to Phyllis's comment about the commonness of the standards, right, even though they're in California, right, all the PARCC states are benefiting from that work because of that relationship. So thank you. Mike?
Okay, at the National Education Association, we've been thinking a lot about the Common Core and about the differences. What we decided to do finally this year is we put together, or will be putting together, a team of teachers from across the nation. And what we're going to do is we're going to try to, get together and really, get down deeper into what it means to have the Common Core standards and really how they're going to impact instruction. So far what we've done is we've come up with like a list, and I have a little list here of all the things that we think that are really important
about the Common Core standards and how they're different, and how they're going to improve teachers' instruction. So one of the things that so I'll give you a couple of the things. One of the things that we think about that is so important because NEA we're about equity and fairness. And so what Barbara was saying, I just kind of want to piggyback on that because that's what's really important about the Common Core standards is that they are for everyone. And what it is, it's going to be all of our responsibilities. And so when we're talking about special populations, special education, and a shout out to Teresa, because I was talking with her last night about gifted students. They're included in there too. Is that we all work together, and the Common Core standards, I think, gives us the ability to do that. It gives us the ability to, think about it as a whole team in the school, and not just as separate groups like we've done so much over all these years. I think another real thing that's different is that it's about the high expectations. We have, the Common Core has set up high expectations for all our students. And I think that when I think about it, I think that it's being a little ironic, and I hear this a lot from our teachers, is that how can you have such high expectations of the students when they can't even do what they already have? There's so many students that, we've had standards for a long time anyway. They haven't been able to do those standards. How are they going to be able to do these standards? I know you've heard it because we all talk about it all the time. But I think what we have to do is that when we communicate with our colleagues and with others, we have to really do a kind of a different job of the way that we explain what these Common Core standards are. I had one of our special ed teachers tell us that she was in a meeting and an assistant principal told his teachers that, well, they're really the same thing, and that all you have to do is tweak it a little bit, right? I mean, and so that's not it, and that, and I think when we talk about misconceptions. What a huge misconception that is. And I think our challenge is to make sure that we talk about that and talk about it often. It is about high expectations for all. It is not the same thing. These standards are not the same thing because it's more not about the verbiage of what the standard is. It's more about what the standard is applying, and it's about and we talk about it all the time, right? It's about the shift. It's about the shift in instruction. And so that's another thing that's really important for us. And then probably the last thing, because it's, so very similar to what my colleagues on the panel are saying, and is that it provides another opportunity for professional development. And I think that's going to be so critical for us, is that it's going to have to happen. One of the things that I've seen that's happened kind of across the country is that professional development has declined in a lot of places. So I think that one of the things that we have to do is really focus on, how do we, build a very rich professional development for teachers, and what is it going to look like when we take these standards and we talk about shift? Because I think right now we really don't know, and I don't think it's real clear in teachers' minds what it means to do that shift in instruction. So I think this gives us a great opportunity for building a very excellent professional development program, because I think the Common Core standards can help us do that.
Thanks, Mike. And I'm going to build off of that idea of a shift, and Barbara asked you this question. right? And Mike also noted that the standards aren't a little bit different, right? Where you can just tweak it a little bit, but they're far more different than that. And so, Barbara, I wonder if you can talk just a little bit about the difference between what we have seen in terms of expectations for students. And here I'm thinking about mathematics, but please go whatever direction you'd like, to what the standards are expecting, right? And what is the implication of that shift with respect to English language learners and students with disabilities? So just one of the things I'm thinking about, we often talk about in mathematics that up until the Common Core State Standards, it was a long list of tricks, right, that kids were asked to learn, and that's what we call math, right? And so with that as a basis.
Sure. So I'm not sure how much exposure everyone's been to some of the work with student achievement partners. If you haven't gone on the website, which is achievethecore.org, we have a tremendous amount of resources and development that talks about the shifts. So in mathematics, we have the 3 shifts. I spoke about focus a few minutes ago, where we say focus strongly where the standards focus. These are things that are not, that we've chosen to make up. This is evident in the standards, it's required by the standards, and that means what's in versus what's out. And that's when we talk about how it's tweaked a little bit, people see that. Oh, well, now I used to teach Pythagorean theorem in 7th grade, now it's 8th grade. That's the only change. Now, there's one aspect, which is what's in and what's out, but it's also what is the major work of the grade. We've seen that PARCC has put out what are the major clusters of each grade, and these are now giving priority to where you spend your time.
So with that, can you say a little bit about what is that impact on English language?
Sure, absolutely. Well, importantly, you now know you're being told what's important. When I taught, I had a list of my district standards as well as state standards. I had some NCTM type standards. I had all sorts of things. And really, you just taught a lot of stuff. Plus, I had my textbook. So you just kind of taught different lessons and different things. Now it's very clear to everyone what are the major areas of focus for your students. One, that gives you more time. So for English language learners, you may have the ability to not feel the need to cover a ton of things, and I need to make sure that my students get a little bit of access to all sorts of things, but I can really just focus on the major work. And in terms of the special populations, you can look at that work and know I am putting them on the right path by just focusing on those things rather than a little bit of everything where all students were barely keeping up. Now your ELL students had very limited access to it because it was too much, it was too confusing. Can I comment on what you said about answer getting, the mnemonics? Because with answer getting versus conceptual understanding, one of the other shifts is rigor, which is conceptual understanding, application, and fluency. The conceptual understanding, really understanding mathematics versus just this answer getting. Can you imagine learning all these tricks and it's not your language, right? And now, I thought we were doing math, and now you want me to learn some kind of little fancy trick with all these letters and acronyms, etc.
Tricks are different depending on the language. Other cultures do division.
Sure.
Differently, different order. Yeah.
Absolutely. And what I was talking with some teachers yesterday, each teacher did different tricks. So a student in 3rd grade might have a certain trick for doing something, for adding fractions. And then they went to a 4th grade class, and the teachers in the other, oh no, we do it that way. And that teacher's like, what is that? No, this is the new way. And there's so much confusion for an average student. So by really focusing on true mathematical conceptual understanding and using tables and diagrams and a lot of visual aids, that enables an English language learner to be able to access the mathematics instead of the tricks.
Right, thank you. So I'm going to shift Phyllis. Tell us a little bit about how PARCC has been proactive in designing its assessments for students with special needs.
really has thought about the needs of English language learners and students with disabilities since the beginning. You know, if you think about its government structure in general and the committees that's been set up, it started there. As Doug went over a little bit yesterday, you know, we have the broad committees of our leadership team and the governing board and the technical advisory committee that provide more general overview and guidance, and certainly has state experts and experts, national experts that address the needs that, you know, specialize in the needs of diverse learners. But we actually have, in addition to that, several groups that address specifically the needs of diverse learners. So we mentioned yesterday, and one of our panel members is on that committee, a technical working group that specifically is there to support the development of PARCC and thinking about the needs of students with disabilities and English language learners. And they have been working closely with another group, which is comprised of state folks, the operational working group, in helping us develop policies and thinking through the things that we need to do in order to assure that we have a test that is valid and reliable for all students. So if you think, so we have that overall structure. But then just in thinking through all the pieces of the process. So in, you know, think kind of all the way back to participation policies and thinking through those together. We've had, being on that operational working group, we've had some really rich conversations. You know, on those calls, we have folks that come in there with more of an assessment framework, and folks that are special educators at the State Department or ELL specialists, that is their focus. They're not assessment folks, they are specialized in students with disabilities or English language learners. And the conversations that we have, the passionate conversations that we have around really trying to make sure we're thinking about the needs of the students, as well as trying to balance that with developing a valid assessment and maintaining the need to really assess the constructs that, as they are written in the Common Core. And that's a hard balance, and we've had some nice discussions about that. Doug did talk through a couple of the pieces, but just to kind of reiterate, we just in particular, students with disabilities, a lot of the policies we're now getting ready and putting out to support that. So one of the most recent ones we're working on is the accessibility guidelines, which really emphasize universal design and trying to build our test so it is more accessible by all students. So just thinking through little things like examples, if we're using graphics, are we using color? Are we not using color? What are the appropriate best colors to use for kids with visual impairments? Making sure that when we're using, if it's black and white, how does grayscale affect kids that have visual impairments? Things like that. Obviously, the overall language demands and the cognitive demands, even in writing items. And you know, we certainly have to balance that part with text complexity. So there will be areas where, you know, we can't really, we certainly have a range of text complexity, but in areas where we're not thinking about complex language and complex text, how can we lighten the cognitive load for students when they're taking the assessment? So there's those pieces.
I'm sorry, so I was just going to tie back. So that text, the cognitive load of text in a particular item, can you give an example of where you might want to reduce some of that so that it makes, right, so students get access to the question itself?
Yeah, and obviously the easy one is in mathematics, where we're not assessing language in the same way. We're assessing students' math ability. And to where we can make a problem or a problem less wordy, right? Less things that are going to distract students from actually solving the problem and focusing on the math. To the extent we can, it's another
technology and assessments, there's an opportunity right now to actually move away from post hoc accommodations. Because what's happening is, you know, you hope that the kids who need accommodations are being assigned those accommodations, and you hope that they're being implemented. But the reality is, when you look at the state data, The ranges, you can go into the NAEP data, they range from 10% of states will assign the accommodation. They don't know if they were paid, they actually use them. Some states we have up to 100%. And that means what they really did is they looked at the list and they said, okay, you get every accommodation on the list. So we're going to throw the kitchen sink at you. But this approach, when you go in and talk, we've done interview studies and talking to people about what's actually happening on the ground. The chances of kids who have diverse needs for getting these supports, they're much, much lower. And so the opportunity with technology-enhanced assessments is to build them in while we're writing the test items, rather than adding them on as an afterthought. And that way, you hope if you do it after, you're really relying on the test administrator. There's a lot of logistics at the school. So one of the good messages you can send out there is that the accommodations that you're adding on, that type of logistical, all the scheduling and the nightmare that goes along with that, that's going to be going down with the technology-enhanced assessment. So that's a great thing that's going to be happening. And now it's just a much easier way to go and be delivering and providing appropriate access to the test construct.
Yeah.
So, you want to add something?
Well, I was just going to say, that pretty much the whole piece of the technology platform that, where we're going to be administering the assessment. And right now we're in the process of developing, and really more in the final stages of the technology architecture, thank you, struggling with words this morning, of what that's going to look like, and what are the possibilities of being able to administer some of these accommodations online. And that's all in development, if you think about the possibilities and how it might look different for kids. So if, a student with a visual impairment, when they go onto the computer, has that ability to adjust the color contrast for a student with a visual impairment. So it's not getting a different test and going off to a different place to take a test. Can I answer that?
Yeah, because it's analogous to they're marking the test items, and so it changes the test items based on the student's access profile. So it's kind of like, when you have a website and you want to change the color across the website, you just change one tag in the beginning of the website and it ripples throughout the entire website. This is the same kind of thing. You can go and have this access profile. So you spend more time deciding what their profile is and their needs, and then they upload it to the state data system and the state sends it over to the test.
So that sounds great, right? However, the test is not going to be here until 2014. Right, and I heard you say you're going to be creating an access profile. I'm going to take the gloves off a little bit here, right? And actually what I heard is now we need to create something else, right? So, and it sounds like it could be very useful, but I'm wondering if you could say a little bit about how is that useful for instruction, right? And what we're going to be doing up until 2014, 2015. And then maybe Mel and Mike might want to chime in on what does that team look like now in the schoolhouse based on how we're thinking differently about making sure students are getting the supports that they need?
Okay, well, I've been busted because I just used jargon, because you're already doing it right now. You have an IEP, or with an English language learner, you might have an English language, and it's called different things in different states, but you might have a plan that's associated with them. So it's the same, building on the same process that's already in place, but I called it access profile, sorry. But it's because you want to, think that it's not that setting them aside, it's actually giving them access to the larger curriculum. So it's just a conceptual shift about what this is really doing. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to add, and I was clicking on but as it is part of the IEP or part of other plans for students beyond students with disabilities, it is part of instruction, and that we shouldn't be using accommodations on assessments, and certainly technology accommodation on assessments that we haven't been using in the classroom every day. And so right now, the things we should be doing is, if we are going to be moving to technology accommodations, is thinking about how we can start through our other instructional strategies and through using computers and technology through instruction, starting to think about what is appropriate for our students, and we can start making those connections as we get to part.
And some of the supports, some are definitely defined by documented need. very, very specific. If you speak a certain language, you might need, have literacy in that language, you might need a word-to-word bilingual dictionary to go and translate some of the more difficult academic language. But other supports, they should and can be provided to all students. So I think that's one of the parts of universal design. You should be doing this in a framework where you're thinking about, what are some of the supports all students may benefit in some areas from highlighting. That might be helpful, that if you have a test item, you might want to have a toolkit where if you need it, if you choose, and you could go and highlight as you're reading through the test. It shouldn't. What used to be limited as accommodations for only certain students, there are some that should be opened up to all students too.
Yeah, school-wide literacy is a given, and I think that's going to provide the kind of support that we need. And universal design is universal accommodation. But really, if we're waiting, we said in our school, students shouldn't need a label to get the help they need when they need it. That if we wait till students fall behind, it's too late. And the Common Core standards, in my opinion, promote that type of thing. They really promote teachers really using formative assessments, using data, really having a clear focus on what they're teaching, and all that benefits struggling learners. Our best learners are going to learn under any system. They've proven that. But we're no longer sorting students. This is about raising the bar for all students. It's about challenging our best students and about making sure that our neediest students get the resources they need, because this isn't about ability. They have the time they need to learn. Our students in our school prove that they can achieve with the best schools, not just in this country, but internationally. We were an IB school, so I know that transition is much like the Common Core curriculum. We outperformed elite private international schools 10 years in a row and received an award from IB for doing that. And our poor, diverse, second language kids, when they're taught a common curriculum and compared with others taught a common curriculum.
So, fantastic, and congratulations. That's a remarkable accomplishment. What was the role that teacher-to-teacher collaboration played in getting there?
The way we built individual capacity was hiring, through hiring. Our teachers interviewed and hired teachers who were team-oriented. If you weren't team-oriented, you didn't work in our school. And it was all about team, it wasn't about individuals. It was about developing common formative and summative assessments, reviewing data, common pacing guides. They worked together and held each other accountable. They weren't accountable to me. They were loyal to each other and focused on their student needs.
Thanks.
Because I've been saying to a couple people, I'm going through an identity crisis. I think I'm an ELL specialist, but or am I a language acquisition specialist? And if so, can I help with students, a broader range of students with diverse language needs? So maybe we need to rethink the roles of what our ELL specialists are doing. They were doing the pull-out, and there are students who do need pull-out and intensive support, but how are they working with the classroom teachers? And there's some really neat techniques that are coming out that are in addition to, the common where you say we need cooperative grouping, we need more visuals, we need more pre-teaching academic vocabulary. We understand it's pretty generally known those are what we need to do for working with ELLs, but there's a new approach that we've been really excited at our center about it. It's kind of spreading throughout the ELL community. It's called functional language analysis. And what you're doing is you're using the language to access the meaning of the content. And it's put out by Mary Schlepper-Grell, and it's SCHLEPPEGRELL, and she's in Michigan. And they've been working with a lot of the Iraqi refugees in Dearborn, Michigan. And what they found, you can see what they're doing with the kids. They're beginning English language learners, and they're going through the text. And I made a list of what they're doing. They're not labeling items, they're not labeling the list. They're going through and they're looking at how technical language is used in sentences. They're doing activities where they're looking how ideas are connected to create complex explanations, how language is used to develop an idea or a character. So they do a lot of work with nonfiction text
They're looking at how language might be used to convey interaction. So you're going through, and you're kind of going, you're breaking apart and analyzing the language in the text, but it's so powerful. She came to our center and was training our language acquisition specialists, and we went through, it's just like a new way to look. I started rethinking how I do my own writing and how you do it. It's such a cool way. You get these sentence frames, and many of you may have heard about OnPar. And it's a project that's out of the Wisconsin Educational Resource Center, and it's developed. A lot of test developers are over at the Center for Applied Linguistics, and so they're creating nonverbal test items that students can go and take. They've taken the Schlepper-Grow approach, they're Schlepper-Growings, and they go and they, it's wild to say this, but, and they're putting sentence frames in their responses and how they're doing it, and just the, not only assessment implications, but the instructional approaches where I've seen kids in Virginia, even though they're not part of the Common Core, they're going on and creating their own tests. They're doing these types of test items for biology and chemistry. And the ELLs, I just looked at their new set of items, and the ELLs can go in and you can drag and drop into advanced chemistry and biology on this. It's super exciting.
So the way you can use this, we used to tell our teachers, every teacher to teach a reading. That doesn't work, don't do that. What Lynn's saying, we did it we learned through practice, but we were teaching language, not only to our second language students, who are under-resourced primary language students, all right, or who had serious vocabulary deficits. So the role of every teacher was to teach the language of your content area, whatever that is. And we threw out level text and taught them the text they needed to learn in the language. We said, you're going to need word problems. That's a real world application. We're going to teach you how to teach your students how to read word problems. We're not going to have different standards for any student. Because when we have different standards or different expectations, we then limit them.
And yeah, Barbara, and I just want to note that as I was walking around to the breakouts yesterday afternoon, I saw a lot of work in the ELA literacy breakouts where you were looking at the reading standards and then also the standards for social studies or history, right? And seeing where, and I heard this phrase a number of times actually yesterday, right? Everybody's working on the literacy. The standards show it, but we also began to hear a real drumbeat about how useful that is across the building. Barbara, I want to give Mike a chance to weigh in.
Sure, so I was just going to say to many people, math in itself is its own language, but mathematical reasoning, which is one of the most important practices, it definitely has its own specialized language. And as Doug said, the math publishers criteria was released last week. If you haven't had a chance to look at that.
We have it up on the portal.
Perfect.
We grabbed it for you. Yeah.
Fantastic. So that's going to give a lot of guidance when you're looking at materials, even with materials you just make up yourself, right? So anything, it doesn't have to be published material. But it's really important that we address these language complexities of mathematical reasoning. So how to argue, how to problem solve mathematically, not just how to read the problem, but how you're going to explain your mathematics. And we can't just assume that all students are just going to know this, but we need to actually teach it. And the materials we need to use, we need to give this. So it's going to help all students, but particularly ELL students.
Yeah, they need structured support.
And that structure does not hurt the advanced learners. Does not hold them back. All right? So providing structure never hurts the more flexible learners, but it's absolutely a necessity for your under-resourced kids or for your language acquisition students.
So I want to push on a pronoun, actually. I've been hearing today and the teachers, and I want to push a little bit on who exactly are you talking about doing this work. And I suspect, give me a softball here, Mike, I suspect it's not just the teacher of English language learners or special education students.
Well, no, it's everybody. And you know, I really like this discussion, but it's kind of got me, like really thinking about some things, and I'm not sure my brain filter is working that good, because what I'm starting to hear is that same thing, is that, well, who is it? And this is what my brain is doing right now. is going, blah, blah, blah. You gotta do some more, your teacher, you gotta do some more technology. You gotta use some technology. Blah, blah, blah. Here's a toolkit, and you're gonna have to use this toolkit now. You know, and so I'm thinking, blah, 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 now I got more work to do, and now it's gonna be tied with my evaluation. So I'm starting to, you know, get heart palpitations, you know, so like, okay, now I'm alone, and who, you know, who is this gonna be for? You know, Mel, you mentioned, well, you brought in, you know, these teachers who were very team-oriented. That's great. I think what we're going to need, it's going to be real important, and it goes back to what I said earlier, it's going to be real important, and it's critical to have some real effective professional development. And it's going to, and that professional development is going to only revolve around the leadership and, you know, and the principals and the central office and the people to really lead this charge and really everybody to take ownership of these common core standards, because everybody is going to have to be on the same page. It's not going to just flow down the hill. You know, here's your toolkit, here's your technology, you know, shift. Sergeant chief, different. But anyway, that's not, I mean, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I just mean that it's just that that is what's going to be critical and what we're going to have to address.
We made a pledge to our teachers. We asked them to pledge that they wouldn't hold students accountable for anything they didn't teach. And we said to our teachers, under the knowledge of your content area, we're not going to hold you accountable for anything we don't teach you. And this is going to take time. It's going to take months and years and ongoing focused professional development. We stayed on literacy for 10 years. We never deviated. We stayed on it. We stayed our course, even though we had a lot of temptations. Right. But our teachers, it has to be a teacher-friendly environment that really supports the capacity building and not inspection of teachers.
Right. So my takeaway from that piece of the conversation is just as the standards are coherent, the entire system has to become coherent.
I was just wondering, when you talk about special populations, has the Native American population, do you have representation for that population, or?
Yeah, Phyllis actually, I think, can respond to this.
Yeah, I think we were talking this morning, I had talked about that in our conversation, so the accessibility and accommodation for fairness work group really accounts for all of those. Although we've been focusing on students with disabilities and English language learners, it really is about trying to make sure we're accounting for the needs of all of those students. And I know we've had several conversations where one of our representatives from Arizona actually talks a lot about the Native American population and just talking about, well, even down to when we're providing those guidelines, well, those are words that we really wouldn't want to use in a test. Those are things that we've pulled out. Topics that aren't appropriate, I mean, we have gotten down to that level of really trying to make sure we're thinking about in developing items the needs of all students, as well as, obviously, we're not perfect, our item developments aren't perfect, is bringing it back to the field through the bias and sensitivity item review to make sure that we're capturing everything. So that's definitely.
Thank you. One in the back, and we also see a couple up front. Thanks.
This is a question for Lynn Shafer. I teach in a school that 30 years ago was 0% ELL and is now 85% ELL. So I was curious when you talked about that shift from comprehensible input towards output. I didn't know if you were talking about student products, student writing. I was just intrigued by that. I wondered if you could elaborate on it.
Okay, we've all been kind of looking at like Krashen's work. He's done a lot of nice work with when you talk to students, are you doing caretaker speech? How are you making things simpler, slower? But that's part of the issue. But if you're only trying to simplify things, it's not as useful. And what we found is a lot of times kids are being kind of passive. And so with these classes, are they getting opportunities to do activities where they have to create something? So it's like thinking about even when you're doing just a basic, beginning ELL are the kids asked to do something more than just recall, skill work? Are they doing some work that involves thinking, strategic thinking, and expanded thinking? So I think it's just kind of shifting more towards constructionism, and you are what you create.
This question is for Dr. Lynn Shafer again. You had mentioned a study for ELL students being conducted at Stanford University and actually sponsored by the Carnegie Corporation. Could you elaborate more on that study? Who's actually conducting it and what have they found so far?
Okay, so there's a project, and what they've done is they've had commissioned papers by the leading ELL researchers in the country. So they looked at English language arts, math, and science all across the curriculum. And so they created different types of just theoretical approaches to have a unified approach from the ELL field to say that the ELL field is committed to moving forward to the Common Core State Standards. But then from there, they're commissioning a series of resources, and they're coordinating with the Council of Great City Schools to also go and field test those resources, because since a lot of the urban schools have higher concentrations of ELLs. So there should be a lot of resources there. And if you're going to Google it, you do understanding language at Stanford, and it should come right out.
Hi, I am from Columbus, Ohio, where we have one of the largest Somali immigration populations in the country. And when I was listening to Mike talk about the blah, 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 I chuckled, and of course we all did, but I think when I talk to teachers about their honest efforts to make a difference and to truly impact instruction, the word that I hear all the time is time. If I just had more time, I can make this happen. But the language acquisition is so tricky for so many of them who are not trained in ELL. And so the question I have for you is, what advice do you have for us to take back to those instructors who say, well, all of this is wonderful, but I just don't have enough time? What can we say to them to help that?
Yeah. And somebody else, obviously, but you hit on it. School leaders and I mean teacher leaders also need to think about, if we hold time constant, we're going to have achievement be the variable. We have to have achievement be the constant. Time then is the variable. We have to figure out how to give students the time they need within the context that we operate, and students the time they need. That was our secret to raising student achievement, was time. All right, that was primary. We controlled time setting and methods. All right, methods is our long-term approach. Varying time for some students and some subjects was our short-term success approach.
Did you vary time for teachers?
Yes, we did. Absolutely. I mean, first of all, the way to vary time with teachers is to have
I did that yesterday.
One of the ways that we worked really hard was to reduce teacher load, total teacher load, not class size per se, but the total number of students the teachers had to come in contact with. That gave them more time with individual students. Now, the Common Core has been mentioned several times by people. By more focus and less breadth, it's going to get the teachers to be able to focus on what they need to teach. That's going to help the time issue tremendously.
Well, okay, I think that if we think about what are barriers, I think that there's only two barriers to doing anything in my own mind. Okay, and the two are money and time. I can work around everything else. It really, truthfully, if I think about what's going to keep me from doing something, really, that's going to be two things that really impact what I can do. So I think I started thinking about what they did in Chicago. I was watching the news this morning and I saw what the union did in Chicago, and I was like, oh wow, isn't that amazing? What they did is did y'all see that? Okay, so what they did is they added more time. Okay, so they added more time to the school day. Okay, well, Chicago's already had a pretty short school day anyway. Okay, but they added more time. But what they decided to do is that it wasn't, they said, well, what are the teachers going to do? Okay, this gives more work to the teachers, right? Doesn't give them a raise. Well, what I guess the school board mayor decided to do was then hire more teachers. Yeah, so right, so there's the money piece. So I'm not sure that that's, going to be the answer. I'm not sure everybody has the answer. Money is tight everywhere. I mean, it's tight with us. So I'm not sure I can give the answer, but it is going to have to be, it does have to be, it is something that we have to address, and we have to really think about that and not use it as an excuse, but figure out a way that we, really do all the things that we need to do.
Thank you. And then let's make these the last three. And actually, Sasheen, I saw your hand go up, so we'll do the last four. And then it'll be time to ask folks to share out their key takeaways, just as an opportunity to practice a little bit. And then we'll shift over to the technology sessions.
I'm a school administrator in New Mexico. Hi, Mel. I have been talking to my group about, I've become a real follower of Jamie Willner's. If you haven't read the book, Schools Cannot Do It Alone, I highly recommend it. But Mel, I was going to ask you, you're very successful parent engagement. We're all dealing with getting parents involved, especially of these students. What did you do that?
Well, we had multiple parent populations. We had half our students spoke Spanish as their primary language. We had a large Arabic group and a large African American group. We didn't have a traditional PTA. We differentiated our approach and had a Hispanic parent group. We had different approaches for each group. In fact, we had a parent leader, volunteer leader, who was a volunteer leader in wanted to work through the state. So we would have 200 to 250 people show up on a monthly basis to these meetings, but they planned it. So rather than having the old traditional PTA, we had multiple groups that met the needs of multiple. Just like we're trying to differentiate our approach with our students, we did differentiate our approach with our parents.
Okay, I just wanted to follow up with something that both Lynn and Phyllis talked about in the conversation between about universal design and accommodations that benefit all students. And as somebody who used to run a NAEP, I was appreciating this time, which was really well related to a reporting because of exclusion rates that some states had. So let me see if I follow something that you said. And I want to talk about it in terms of something tangible. So let's say you're leaving a lot of accommodations in math, as some states have had or have. Are you saying that when the next generation with universal design, that it becomes kind of a moot point in terms of if it's an accommodation that could benefit all kids? I mean, who wouldn't? Is that going to be a platform off or on switch, or is that part of that menu that you plug into, or is that just not on the table at all? Talk about just some of the tangible accommodations that are going to be benefit for all kids. I'm sure like large print or increasing font size or highlighting it as you suggested. And could you talk about how the conversations evolve into making those decisions?
So I would just start by saying there haven't been final decisions about what will constitute an accommodation. So in that specific example, we allow for mathematics. That decision hasn't been made whether that will be an accommodation. Would that be something that is available to all students? We are still in the process of making those decisions. I can tell you, certainly we think about some things that probably are more likely to happen and where the conversations have been are things like having a highlighter would certainly be something that is more available to all students. Things like enlarged text, although most kids wouldn't need it, but perhaps with a graphic they want to look at a little bit differently, or magnifying glasses, to be able to highlight over a particular area. We all have those on our own computers that we can use, and even on my phone, I can highlight it and enlarge something to be able to see it better. Those are just some of the examples that are really in my head, but we are still working out which ones would be more the documented accommodation versus things that would be available to all kids.
Or
what additional information do you need?
I think it was about what are the variables that play into those conversations, considerations, and is it dependent on the fact that we're looking through other states and what do they offer in their staff manuals or in their accommodations manuals?
So just before you answer, really, the follow-up question, because you didn't have a mic, was what are the variables that are in play around making some of these determinations? For example, that there are 23 states coming together to make some of these decisions, certainly one of the variables.
Yeah, I think it's also related to the test items themselves. So you can do comparisons across the states, and the states can have discussions, but a lot of it, from there, you jump right to the construct that's being assessed as well, because it's a new platform and things are being embedded. Things that states may not have included in their guidelines are now, they're now saying, okay, we could do that. So there are some additional possibilities. So I think the broader one is that they're looking at where states have larger policies. For those states that have smaller and less things that are available to students, they're probably moving more towards having more supports available, but they're also embedded into the test as well. And so, you know, part of it is looking like at word-to-word dictionary, you know, and working out the logistics of how do you operationalize that, since there are, you know, there are so many different languages in the country, and yet, when you actually break it down, you know, 80% of the ELLs in the country speak Spanish. But then from there, there's 20 academic languages. So you can look at those 20 academic languages worldwide. It ranges, some counts say 14, some say 20, so it depends on who's doing the count. But there are other languages like Somali, where it's an orally dominant culture, or the Native American languages. So you still got to sort through those issues. That's still being worked out. It's actually still being worked out by both SORTA. So those are some of the decision points. So sorry, I can't do that.
And I think, you know, we're trying to look at the research that's out there, as well as knowing that our accommodation guidelines aren't set up to be finalized for another full year. And we want to be able to do some research and really look at how kids interact with items on the platform as we begin to pilot items in this next spring. So being able to look at those things, as well as certainly states are considering what their policies are now, but also continuing to change. I think, you know, a lot of states have been really thinking about, one, what is the context of it now, but how do we all come together to make sure we're meeting the needs of kids? So right now, test developers, they're developing multiple choice items. But the next wave of items you're going to see, you're going to have scenarios, you're going to have simulations. Go look at ONPAR, go look at ONPAR, look at that website. They have test items you can play with for multi-semiotic representations. I mean, it's a mouthful, but there's some really cool ways to go with kids' authentic experiences and be tested and still get scoring points. That's how one item, you can get 8 sets of scores from that item. So that's not version 1.0, because that's only 2 years, but you know, that's down the road. So.
I think we have 2 last questions.
Yes, hi. I have a lot of questions, but with regard to the Common Core, in my district with L population, we use the SIOP model a lot, but the new Common Core talks about close reading with text complexity, with no pre-teaching, vocabulary, no background, not giving background knowledge. So how does that, you know, go along with, you know, actually giving them a lot of visuals and a lot of background knowledge and vocabulary, which is really good. I always thought was good teaching. So how does that, you know, work? And also with regard to the assessments, talk about math having simpler language, but you can't do that on the ELA assessment. So what types of accommodation? We already do use the vocabulary, you know, word-to-word translation, which most students don't use. But how would you be able to accommodate the L's on the test as well? Yeah.
In relation to your question about, you're really referring to independent reading, students need to be read independently. What we told our people is that it's a process. The standards are what students should be able to do at the end of the year. They may not be able to do that at the beginning of the year. The other thing that I'm particularly concerned about is the cognitive scientists will tell you that background knowledge is key to further acquisition of further knowledge. So in my opinion, there's some bias in that, and there's been some softening of that approach. I think what David Coleman was saying, there's some of the pre-reading things go way too far. Tim Shanahan's written some things talking about more of a reasonable middle ground for that.
They did put out something on, because when you read what it says on the website for, Common Core, it doesn't, say that.
Yeah, think about it though, it's a developmental process. Where do students need to be? How do I get them there? They're not going to walk in your class independent readers. They also we talked about gradual release. Well, that implies that over time you develop that with the students. But if you stop building background knowledge, what happens is your under-resourced kids suffer tremendously. The kids we're talking about, second language learners particularly, who maybe lack background knowledge and experience, are going to suffer tremendously, and teachers have to continue to build that knowledge.
If you imagine a setting where you have ELL students and other students, and you're asking questions about background knowledge, for instance, who's been to Gettysburg? And you have a whole bunch of students saying, yes, I went on a trip there. Now those ELL students who might not have had those experiences are feeling even further behind. So I think when they talk about that background knowledge, some classes have gone overboard, where you talk so much about who's been there, who's done this, who's read this, and if you come from a family who had rich experiences, wow, you're great. Sometimes you're like so great that you don't even feel you need to read the actual passage. Meanwhile, the other students who have not had that also don't feel like they need to read it, because they're like, you know what, I don't even have a chance here. I'm not even part of this discussion. So I think when they talk, again, I'm a math person, but I've heard things, and that there's a problem about where the extent of background knowledge actually differs from the learning of that text. But I don't think that's necessarily the case when you're talking about pulling small groups or working with ELL students. Sue Pimentel, she wrote one of the articles, and I was looking through that a few days ago, and they talk about with ELL students to work and look at background knowledge, because they don't have access, they might not have had access to that. But I think it's two different things, where one is looking at it taken away from the actual reading versus actually building up to the reading. And it's just like a fine line.
Moderation, right?
Our teachers' favorite strategy is PWL. So they always wanted to know, what do you know? Because you have a diverse group of kids in your class. Our students could come in and teach PWL. It was so consistently used. They knew that strategy and they knew it helped them. I had 3 students, just a quick story, came to me one time and said, you got to help this teacher. I thought, well, they're going to complain. I said, no, all our other teachers do PWL this way, and she does it this way, and all the students know she's doing it wrong.
I can imagine not teaching my students, like, they get in 5th grade, and they were refugee camps. We worked them through, and by the end of 5th grade, they were on a 2nd grade reading level, which is amazing, but it was, a team of teachers working through. You have to go into target text that's at their just right reading level, and then you're pushing it all the way, you're just leveling it, moving it up.
I'm just saying, it was on the website, it's in the model lessons, I don't know if it's the state website, or I think it was long, it was a lesson for middle school, and how to teach it, and how to teach it was, give them the text, don't say anything, they read it, and then afterwards, you discuss it, how I'm reading it to myself, I would lose most of my students right away.
Oh, it would have been a deal.
I agree with you, but it doesn't say say that. It's not explicit enough. Oh, good.
Lynn used a very important word.
It's a great question, and I think we need to address it, but let's do it concisely so we can get to the last question.
Lynn used a very important word, push. She taught in elementary school that fed into my high school. And over the years, I heard my teachers, ELL teachers, use that word almost continually. Pushing students. We need to use that word school-wide with every student. We need to be pushing our students to do more and do better. I don't push them. But instead of urging them on, they're always challenging them appropriately.
Thank you.
Thank you
very much.
Good morning. I just had a question because I heard you talking about funding and time and understanding that's a necessity. And I definitely see how we need to transition, especially for our diverse populations, around looking from compliance to providing more stronger instructional support. But when you talk about time, you talk about time in a classroom for a given year. Have you thought about talking to states and talking to districts about flexibility waivers in terms of looking at newly arrived ELL students with low proficiency levels? And we know that the U.S. Department of Education has provided some flexibility about a one-year waiver exempting them from ELA assessments and continuity assessments. But I know in Ohio, we're looking at pursuing a waiver to expand that for ELL students with low proficiency levels to extend it to second years. To their second year as well. Have you ever pursued about discussing that and looking at it from that standpoint? Because it also supports the instructional component to help them move forward.
Is it from the SEA?
From the SEA.
That's going to be really hard because Florida tried it, other states have tried to do additional parts of the flexibility waivers, but they're pretty
Yes, and we've actually engaged in some of the research that you talked about, and I know Dr. Gary Cook he's informed some of our work to talk about discussing that. But one of the key things that we found is that when our students are actually moving forward from becoming ELL learners and actually being identified as being proficient in their language, they actually are performing academically comparable to their regular ed students. So we're seeing how time is also serving as a factor if we can provide that opportunity that allows for more enriched instruction.
Well, and I like the point that you're making that you're differentiating the ELLs because too often you hear ELLs treated as an ethnic group, like you could just substitute in Hispanic or whatever in that, and it's not. There's a lot of differentiation, and looking at like the state data, time and program is almost more powerful than ELP level. So if you're going to look at state scores and then disaggregate it, it's more, if you have kids that have been in your program for more than 7 years, and you've been identified as long-termers and they're at the intermediate plateau, something's going on. You know, do they have a disability or do they not? Do you need to go to, if there is some way to run the data? I mean, I'd like to follow up with you, but, and just getting to the issue of time and time in the classroom, just to pass on to you, I'm not sure if you're all aware, but there are so many different federal grants right now going on to build out state data systems. And you're about to have access in the next 2 years to all this different data. You're taking the data warehouses and they're putting dashboards on top of it. And basically just about every state is doing this where you're going to be able to go in and run reports and do ad hoc queries. And I was talking to principals at this one meeting, they were showing how when they were sorting for their kids for RTI, what took them before, it used to take, they say 4 days, now it took them 30 minutes. So they could run reports like that. I saw an early warning indicator from Santa Ana Unified School Districts called Project Era. Oh my gosh, like the Project Era, they're able to go and run the kids who are in danger of dropping out. They're able to look at, they're building a college and career indicator. With the data, you're going to have so much at your hands to do, to sort, you know, to look and see who are the targeted kids, who's at risk. I think that's going to help with the time, but then the thing is to look at and have the conversations to build everyone's data literacy. So that's the next step.
Thank you, Lynn. And thank all of you. I know you have more questions, and we have no more time. I'm sorry. Please give a round of applause to our